In this class, we're going to take a look at factorizing using a common factor. So factorizing is just the process of taking an expression and rewriting it with a bracket. It's the opposite of multiplying out or expanding brackets. So we've got these different forms of algebraic expressions, and we want to rewrite them in a factorized form. So we're introducing a bracket where no bracket already exists. There's different types of factorizing. The one we're going to look at today uses one bracket and what's called a common factor. But there's also the type where you've got two brackets and you need to factorize those in a particular way. And we'll deal with those in another class. Today we're just going to limit our discussion to factorizing with one bracket. So the first thing you've got to do is to look at the terms in your expression. So here we've got two terms. This guy's got three terms, and we're looking for the common factor. So the common factor can just be something which is physically obviously present in both. So here there's clearly a 3 in both. Here there's clearly an A in both. But then other examples don't have something which is obviously in common. Like there's no 8 in this guy, there's no 12 in this guy. This guy's got an A, he doesn't. This guy's got a B, and he doesn't. So how do we deal with that scenario? Well, a better way to think of it is not just what is physically present, but what divides into those terms. What is the highest number or the highest letter that divides into both? So with numbers, it's easy enough at first to think of those common factors. With letters and the combination of numbers and letters, it's a little trickier. So that might take a bit of experience. But with this guy here, the common factor would be 3, because 3 is, well, it's present in both terms, but more importantly, 3 divides into both terms. So 3 is a common factor. Then we just need to figure out what goes inside the bracket, remembering that we want these two things to be equal. So 3 times something has to give you 3x. Well, that has to be an x. 3 times something to give you positive 3z. So that has to be a positive z. So when we're doing these, we're kind of working backwards in our mind, because the answer you get, if you then expand out that bracket, you should get back to where you started. So if you've not done expanding out brackets, multiplying out brackets in the past, then you might want to check that out first. Because really that's what we're doing here backwards. We're thinking, right, what does this need to look like so that if I did multiply out that bracket, I would get back to where I started. So either just follow along in this class and then check out multiplying out brackets later, or check that out and then come back into this class. So this one here, we're looking not for anything that's physically present in both, because clearly there is nothing like a 3, but we can see that 4 divides into both 8 and 12. That would be the highest common factor of those numbers. So 4 is going to be our common factor for this question. So we can stick down the bracket again and then just think, what do I need to put here so that the thing that goes here times a 4 gives me an 8a? Well, that would need to be a 2a, because 4 times 2a gives you 8a. The same for the minus 12b, we would need to have a minus 4b, miscounted that one. Need to have a minus 3b, because 4 times minus 3b gives us minus 12b. So that's that guy there, fully factorized. Okay, slightly different scenario because we don't have any numbers, but that's fine, that will happen sometimes. So the common factor here is a. A is present in both, but more importantly, a would divide into both of those terms if it was a number, or just thinking of it as an algebraic term. So a goes outside the bracket, that's our common factor. A times b would give us ab, and then a times positive c would give us plus ac. So that's that guy fully factorized, quite easy. This guy here is a little more difficult because we can see that it's got a d in each term. So d is going to form part of the common factor, but there's also a common factor of 2 between the numbers, because 2 divides into both. So you could write this as 2 and then your bracket. You could write it as d and then your bracket, but you would find in both scenarios, in fact let's just work them, that the inside of the bracket factorizes again. So if we pull out a 2 as a common factor, then we get 4d plus 7d. So that's fine, that's factorized, but it's not fully factorized because the inside has got a common factor of d. So we would then go 2 and then d and then another bracket and then a 4 plus a 7. Starting to get a little bit ugly at that point. It would be the same down here. we would say, right, d is a common factor. That needs to be an 8 plus a 14d. Now we've got a common factor of 2 inside there, so we would need to take that further. To avoid the double bracket, which is okay, but it's not really what we want to do, we just have to be sure to pick out the highest common factor at the start. So I factorise that with a 2 and then with a d, but a better way to do it is just to use both. Use 2d as your full highest common factor. Then that'll mean that whatever goes in here cannot be factorised any further. So 2d times something to give 8d, well, that would be 4. And then 2d times something to give 14d squared, well, that would need to be a 7d, because 2 times 7 is 14, d times d is d squared. They're probably the most common scenario where you've got a number and a letter as part of your common factor. So that's probably the style to focus on. I mean, these are all important and you will see all of them, but this one is probably the most tricky to get used to at first and the one that's going to be most important. Yeah, so let's maybe move on, have a look at the final example. So here we've got 3 terms. It doesn't matter how many terms you've got, you just go through the same process of trying to identify the common factor. So the letters A, B, and T don't have a common factor, there's no common letter there, but the numbers 2, 4, and 16 do have a common divisor of 2, so that tells us that 2 is going to be our highest common factor. We need to squeeze 3 terms into the bracket, so making your bracket a little bigger this time. So 2 times A to give you 2A, 2 times 2B to give you 4B, and then 2 times 8t would give you 16t. So that's that guy now fully factorised. It's quite unusual to factorise 3 terms into a bracket. You'll probably see far more examples where you're factorising 2 terms into a bracket, but know that it doesn't matter how many terms you've got, you just need that many terms inside your bracket. So that's factorising using a common factor, in other words, some term outside the bracket. Once you get comfortable with that, practice some of the questions because it's a really common technique, and then move on to other types of factorising, in particular factorising a trinomial, which is an expression which you're then going to put into 2 brackets, which is also a really core algebraic technique. Factorising is a little tricky at first. You're going to see a variety of question types, a variety of scenarios. Just got to work enough questions until the point where you get comfortable with them. Once you've got comfortable with them, move on to these guys, which are slightly more difficult, so slightly more fun.